first thing I want to note is that I unfortunately don't have the capacity or resources to properly cover why exactly there is a gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. I'm also not able to acknowledge all the incredible people and organisations whose hard work before, during and after these events made it all possible. However, if you are interested in discovering more, I've compiled a bunch of links to resources that are able to do just this. These can be found on the Sources Plus page of my website.
A brief history of the Closing the Gap reports. Close the Gap is a social justice campaign that aims to achieve health equity for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people by 2030, so one generation. The campaign started in 2006 as a National Indigenous Health Equity Campaign, and it came to be known as the Closing the Gap strategy in 2007 when the Council of Australian Governments, COAG, committed to be held accountable towards this goal. This was the first time that such a high level of commitment had been made by the Australian state and territory governments. The original targets chosen for this initiative were to close the life expectancy gap within a generation by 2031, to halve the gap in mortality rates for Indigenous children under 5 by 2018, to ensure all Indigenous 4-year-olds in remote communities have access to early childhood education by 2013, to halve the gap for Indigenous students in reading, writing and numeracy by 2018, to halve the gap for Indigenous people aged 20 to 24 in Year 12 attainment or equivalent attainment rates by 2020, and to halve the gap in Indigenous employment outcomes between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians by 2018. From February 2009, each year the Australian Government releases a report on the progress of the Closing the Gap initiative, and it serves as an update on recent Indigenous health stats. The Closing the Gap reports provide an update on the statistics and let us know if each target's on track. Parts 2 and 3 of this series are really going to look into how these targets have tracked over time and the data behind them. From 2008 to today, the targets have changed and some have even expired. In 2013, the target to ensure that all Indigenous 4-year-olds in remote communities have access to early childhood education expired, and it was found that it wasn't met, with only 85% of Indigenous 4-year-olds being enrolled when the target was 95%. This target was then extended to 2025. In 2014, a 7th target was added to close the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous school attendance by 2018. Cut to 2016 and the COAG is looking ahead at 2018. It's the 10-year anniversary of the agreement and 4 targets are set to expire. They decide that the Closing the Gap agenda is due for a refresh. By December 2018, draft targets were issued for further discussion. These refresh targets cover 6 priority areas and are further broken down into targets and outcomes. The new targets focus less on the existing deficits between Indigenous and non-Indigenous health and instead outline positive aims for the success and progress, which are much more measurable. For example, the unmet target to halve the gap in infant mortality rates by 2008 has been replaced by a new goal. By 2028, the campaign aims for a healthy birth weight in 90 to 92% of babies born to Indigenous mothers. As of September 2019, these targets are still in the draft stage and are yet to be reported on. This has been part 1 of Closing the Gap Explained. For sources, further information, and the rest of the videos in this series, head to my website and check it all out there. Cheers!